Hey everybody, welcome to another session. This is session 2 for our live design sessions with Blender. Super excited about this. Please let me know how the technology holds up this time. I made a few changes, so hopefully we don't have any kind of hiccups like we did last time. And I'll be looking into the chat to see what you guys are saying. Cool, so for those of you that are new to joining, so we're designing a new hospital. And it's a very aspirational design for this hospital. It's in London, St. Mary's, and I even have Google Earth pulled up here. Well, I thought it was around where it's supposed to be. Let's quickly find our site. So we've got Hyde Park, Paddington train station. This is called Paddington Basin, and this here is St. Mary's Hospital. And let me make myself a little smaller. So this is our site over here. And that's where we're going to be putting our new building, which we started with the massing last time. And if you want to figure out a little bit more about how we set up our scene initially, how we got to this level, and more about the initial concept, then definitely go and check out the first video of this live design sessions. Great, so now we're going to continue, and we're going to try to refine our massing, which is located over here a little bit more. So let's close Google Earth before my computer decides to crash. And hi, Arc Jennifer, nice to see you. Anwar, hi. Tad, hi. Thank you guys so much for joining me. It's a pleasure to have you. And yeah, let's get started. Cool. Okay, so what do we want to do now? So we want to figure out a way where we make this more or less the right massing. And so in the last time, we left off with the idea that we have 3 buildings, and this blue strip over here, that represents a waterfall. So again, if you want to find out a little bit more about the concept, then check out the first video. But essentially, the design is focused around water. So we want to introduce as much experience, as much access to what we've got over here, which is the Paddington Basin as possible. Because the hospital, and just so for your information, let's create a new layer over here. Hide this one. And if I go to top view, so it's quite big. Yeah, so all of this, maybe it's even all of this here. This is all St. Mary's Hospital. Maybe up to here. There's a historic pub over here, so that won't be going anywhere. Right, so this is what we've got, and this is the new site. Yeah, so it's a very big complex, very old hospital. There is a new building that's happening over here that they're building, and again, this site is actively being looked at by multiple architects. So there's going to be something going on there. It probably won't be as exciting as what we do here, but you will have the right programmatic. But maybe, who knows, just maybe some of the ideas that we're discussing here, they might actually influence some of the design to make it a little bit better. Right, because again, we don't know what's going on the inside. We're going to make the building work more or less like we know how buildings need to work, having a grid, having a core, and having a facade. But for us, it's really about that connection here. That's the most important part. And understanding how we add value to the whole site, to the hospital, by having this access to the site. So we definitely need to step back some of our buildings in here and create a nice plaza. And this plaza is for people to have direct access to. So when you're in a hospital, you don't only feel like you're in a hospital, but you should have access to these beautiful amenities here. And it's a shame I closed Google Earth because I want to talk a little bit more about the site. I am intimately familiar with it. I have been living around the area for quite a bit of time, so I've cycled every day through it. So, and I've explored it because it's really beautiful actually in there. Okay, so going back into it, and you can see the public realm over here is all really nice. So this is a master plan that has been going on for quite a bit of time. and it's an excellent experience. This used to be industrial land, so it was at the edge of town, so you had a lot of Victorian factories. They had access to water before trucks and automobiles and all of that, and it just keeps growing, right? So this is a very nice, fairly new building. All new stuff here, fairly new, very beautiful plaza over on that side. Paddington train station. So these are the trains that come here from the main train station in London. And you can even see some of the more historical fabric of the hospital here with crazy, crazy, crazy additions in all kinds of ways just to make it work. You need something, you build it. You find a way and you build it, right? But it's different times now. And as you can see, even in here, you can clearly identify that there's all this really nice public space. Even this pedestrian path is quite wide. However, on this side, we've got some temporary pontoons, and then we have some boats. So this is almost like the private street of all the boats that live there. So it's exciting, but not so much about the hospital. And this is the current main hospital building, and it's got zero interface with the canal. Granted, when it was built, the canal experience was probably significantly different, and none of the land that was around it existed. None of these buildings existed. They're all less than 20 years old. Maybe some pushing 20, maybe not. And this hospital, I'm not sure exactly when it was built, but it looks like 60s, 70s design. So there's one remnant of the past, which is over here. You've got some nice warehouses. So I imagine a lot of what we've got going on here is based on these kinds of warehouses before all of this new buildings, new urban fabric was built. So yeah, the experience is significantly better, and the hospital experience needs to match that. It is part of this master plan in a way, isn't it? In fact, I haven't looked at the master plan to see whether there was some kind of intonation about the potential of the rebuild for St. Mary's Hospital in regards to some of the public space around the canal. So yeah, to summarize, we're gonna put a nice plaza in there. Okay, right. So how do we do that? Okay, so the last time we talked about using booleans and having a really nice and easy access to be doing all this work with as much booleans as possible. I'm just going to adjust myself so you can see me a little better here. There you go. And so if I click on this massing, turn on my screencast keys. By the way, if you guys have any questions, feel free to ask in the chat. Excuse me, seem to have a tiny bit of a cough. So massing 0, 1, if we look at massing 0, 1, and we look at the way that it's organized within the modifier stacks, so we have 2 booleans. So if we turn off these booleans, 3 booleans, actually. So we got a boolean here. And what is doing that boolean work for us? Let's find out. So we have the context. Boolean 1, 2, 3. So here it is. Just very simple elements. I find that having this kind of setup allows us to tweak and modify our massing much easier. Topologically, it's not correct. It has to be at some point once we start thinking about the facade a little bit more, but at this stage, it's completely fine for us. So the next thing that would be super useful for us to have is put on some floors. So I'm going to duplicate the footprint that we have saved here. By the way, these files are posted on Patreon. So if you would like to support this work and if you would like to add, have access to the files, then yeah, check it out. Links should be in the description below. So footprint, duplicate that, Shift D, escape. We're going to scale that quite a bit with S. And we actually want to apply the scale then. So we go to Object, Apply, Scale, and now Add Modifier, Array, and we're going to add floors. So we want to uncheck relative, check constant, and change the distance Z to 3. So hospital floors are pretty high, okay? And they, because there's a lot, and the technical bit between the floors, that keeps growing even higher. So you have your floor that's this big, and then you have something that's actually even smaller. So, you know, if we look at a typical floor, it's always nice to have a good sized podium. And on top of the podium, we've got our floors. But when we think about especially hospital floors, also office floors these days, but especially hospital floors, they have to have a very big distance between the occupiable space and the technical space. So this here, this holds structure, this holds all the system, all the systems that need to go to all the floors, right? So, and there are loads of them, you know, gas systems, oxygen systems. I don't even know what kinds of systems. I don't have too much experience working with hospitals, but I have worked with team. Actually, yeah, I do have a bit. It was way back when though. It was like before I finished my studies. Okay, so we want to replicate that. So what does that mean in terms of our floor-to-floor height? So that should be something like 4.2 meters, which in general is quite 4.2. That's quite a lot, but in this case it should be okay. And now we just array it. And what we're going to do is boolean these floors. And why are they going sideways? Because when you enable constant, there is a default distance x that we just need to put back to 0. Great. Right, so once we have these floors, what I like to do is move them up, because the ground plane, the ground floor, is going to be a little bit more generous. Maybe we do something like 6 meters in there, or 5.5 meters. So that ground plane, that's going to be something different. These are only the floors that are happening on top. Okay, and next we want to add a boolean. And for the boolean object, we can select from the outliner, and we want intersection. And boom, just like that, we have our floors. And now let's go to one of the cameras that we set up in the last video. I'm going to make it a little bit bigger, so we can go to object data properties, camera, viewport display, and change the size to something like 15. So we see that a little bit better. And then let's adjust the user interface a little bit so we see what that camera sees here. Great. So that's our camera view. So we see a little bit of the blue, and that's the important part that I want to focus on a bit more. In fact, we can move this back. And now to understand the sizes of the floors, we've got a couple of human scales, always useful. So this plane is waterfall. It's always good to name things. Sometimes even I don't if you're moving really fast through it, but Blender at least makes it quite easy, right? So this is something Rhino doesn't have. So each object is, you can see that in the outliner. Okay, massing, footprint 0, 1. So these are our floors. Floors over here. And we can slightly grow them by adding a solidify modifier just for the massing, the initial part. So we understand their actual size. And we want that to go on the +1. Why do I want to see that? Because now in this view, we should be able to see that. And let's turn on material preview, so we have a slightly better understanding. And I'll grow these a little bit more. There you go. Now they should be visible. Maybe even more, 0.1. And they can be even thickness. Why aren't you growing more? Okay, we need to add another. So this, well, let's isolate to show you. So with our floors, so what do we do with this? They just go up and down, right? And we actually need this to go down. So these are the actual floor thicknesses. So we can define all of that. And usually I do that before even the Boolean. we do it only once, and then it intersects all the same. And typical floor height is floor slab is 500 mil, so 0.5 meters. So we've got that going on here. And now we still don't see the outside because that's all within the footprint. So we can add another solidify. Let's go in here, add a solidify, and now grow on the outside, something like 0.1. And now we see those. To make it even more relevant, let's create a new material and call it floor. For right now, we don't really care too much about the settings, just something that's easily visible is something different. There you go. That's what we want. So now we understand our floor. So the idea is with every sense, with each bit, we have a little bit more intelligence that allows us to design a bit better. And I find that quite important, because without having that kind of experience of understanding how we design something that's a little bit better, then we don't really know exactly how we're designing. And that's the point here, is to get better at designing with all the tools that are available for Blender. I keep repeating myself with that. All right, let's get back into it. Okay, so control space to minimize and so I use these hotkeys a lot, by the way. So control space to go in different windows. If my mouse is just in that place, it goes bigger or smaller. And I want to swap these because I have my screen things there. Oh, that didn't work. Let's swap them back and then turn them off here. Screencast keys and turn them on in this viewport. There you go. So you guys can see that a little bit better. Let's go back to camera view. I like to set up multiple camera views that I find important. So this is one that's definitely important. Now let's go from the other side and figure out a place where having a camera would also be important. And what we can do in the view is not use, so in Blender, we've got like a global camera. So if that's the active camera, it's active everywhere. But we also have the option to overrule that in each individual viewport. And I have these headphones, which I realized I don't need. I sound so much better without them. Okay, so how do we set that up? So we go into view, view lock, and camera to view. Nope, that's not the one. So local camera, that's the one we want to use. And now we set up the camera. So we'll call this cam 01 street. And let's call this one, the new one that we set up, cam 02 street. So now we say we want this to only be locked to camera 01 street. We don't care which is the Blender camera, the active Blender camera. We want only that one. And how can we tell which one is the active camera? It has this rectangle that's filled in on top, and this one doesn't. So that's the way to tell. So now we can make it in the, we can make the active camera in the outliner. So if I click on here, you see this one is filled up and this one isn't. So now that's the active camera, but this view stays the same, which is exactly what we want. And now we're going to duplicate this. So I'm going to right click over here and horizontal split over here, maximize this just so it's a little bit easier to work with, N to show the viewport, the sidebar in the viewport, view, local camera. It's user interface for this is not the best, right? It's hidden in a sidebar, and this sidebar is really important in case you're not super familiar with Blender, and then it's going all in there. So but you learn to work with it. There are some add-ons that attempt to make this easier and put, for example, all the render-based or the view-based properties in one panel. But I think sometimes that adds even more to the clutter. Okay, so we have that kind of camera set up here. I'm not sure that's the best place for it, but we'll just keep it in there. So with our massing, with the non-destructive booleans that we have in Blender that work really well, they're in fact, I think, one of the best in the industry right now. I know they work much better than 3ds Max, although with their newest version, they've gotten a little bit better. But they still work really well. So with this ground floor, we want to kind of eat out of it a little bit more. So those views get emphasized. Our top views, our top buildings, they work fairly well. but we definitely want to start making this a little bit more generous. So let's make this just a little smaller. So these views, I always like to keep them over here. Great. And another thing that I'm noticing is that our corridors, our gaps between our buildings, between the different masses, they're too small. So how can we fix that? We can just go to these Boolean objects over here, go into item, dimensions in X, because they were rotated in object space. So if we change that size, that's the wrong one. If we change this one, it automatically just, and look at it, I just love this, you know, it's like everything starts to adjust itself like super easily. That's the part where this is exactly want to show you guys and everybody else that, you know, Blender has so many tools that are super easy to use to get your architectural models modeled faster. So let's put here something like 12 meters. And then let's go to the other box that we've got and maybe do something the same, 12 meters. Great, so that's a bit more generous. I think that's more like the kind of spacing that we have for, how many floors do we have now? Let's see, let's click on the floors and go in our array. We have 16 floors, right? So quite a few. Okay, so now let's start creating something on the ground floor that becomes a little bit more generous. What do I mean by that? So let's get in this view over here, and I'm gonna get one of my tablets so I can draw. And let's grab now. So we have this ground. No drawing. Need a new layer. Change the color. There you go. So this ground should be a little bit more open. It's very similar to this very quick sketch that we drew, right? So we should have something that's stepped in, and then all the floors on top, they can be stepped out a little bit. So we have more generosity. We allow for more people and more connection and more views between this side and that side. So let's try and do that. So how would that look? So we want to step this in, and then we want to draw that in that direction there. And then the same thing happens over here. And then that grows in there. So basically all the ground levels, you know, they go in, they're stepped in. And so we'll do that with the Boolean again. All right, let's turn that off. And get in this view. Just moving my tablet a little bit out of the way. Now, let's add another mesh plane. Great. And scale. So now this mesh, it would be best if it was connected to this massing. Or at least have, so how do we want to do that? We can even do it as part of here. Yeah, maybe that's the easiest way. Yeah, let's do that. Because we already have these gaps, so whatever we do, well, it doesn't need to be really aligned, though, does it? Sometimes it can be slightly off angle, but okay, for an easy start, we'll start modifying these booleans. So what do we want to do? We want to go into edit mode, Control R, to create a loop cut. We can drag that, it doesn't matter where, because then we can modify it here in the transform menus. We want to use global, local, global. They're all the same in this case, which means our origin point, if I exit out, that point is at 0. That's what we want. Sometimes they're different though. So in here, let's put 6 meters, okay? So now we have a loop cut that should be more or less exactly at where that level starts. In fact, we want to do 5.5 to take into account our floor plates that we've got over here. Next, let's get these sides. So I'm going to grab that side and extrude it. And I'm going to extrude it, how much? 2 meters? Let's see how that works. Alt Z. I click Alt Z a lot, so that puts us in X-ray mode. So it's this icon over here. And I find that quite useful. So Alt Z and then E to extrude, and that should go 2 meters as well. Okay, and you see, just like that, if we go back to our views, now we've stepped this back, and we've stepped it back in such a way that if we rotate, then that stays with it. So it's really nicely aligned. Might even go 3 meters. So let's move this an extra meter out. So -1. And then why did I type -1, you might ask here? Because look at the arrow, the direction of the arrow that's pointing. So it's in the negative direction. So let's click here, click drag, and +1. Okay. So another super cool thing that we can do here is I can click on this shape, and because they're kind of similar, we can actually have them copied. So essentially like blocks in AutoCAD. And how do we do that? Or families in Revit. So I can go in here in the object data properties. First, let's name this bow. Just bow is fine. Click on here. And now we can change the object data. So we have the object container and the data that it's referring to, which is a mesh data. And that mesh data can be shared. So let's find bow. And you see our floors are now automatically adjusted. In other words, if I go in here, let's bring this really out. Let's turn off the context for a second. And you see it does it on both sides. Super cool. Super nice, super neat, super cool. Okay, let's bring that back now to what it was before. And most importantly, if we rotate these, they both rotate. Well, actually, they don't both rotate, but the bottom stays with it. So that's one bit that we've done. Great. The next thing that we talked is stepping back some of the other sides. And this edge, that doesn't need to be stepped back because we want to force the people to move in this direction over here. And the same here. This back edge, we don't need to step it because if you look at the context, top view, let's turn on the context back on. We've got these buildings happening over here. Yeah. I don't think this is exactly the right footprint, but we'll just leave it. What we do need to check though, and I keep closing Google Earth, is whether the neighbors have windows. This time I'm going to type it. Oh, no. I really like flying in Google Earth. They do have oh no. Great, they don't. Only the areas on top have some windows. And that's cool because that means that we can, go against the edge, basically up to here and then some up to there. Of course, in London, there are all kinds of planning regulations. That means that you have to provide enough light for your neighbors. We won't go into that detail right now. We just have make some basic assumptions, some nice assumptions that sound like they should be about right. Okay, so bringing this back in here. Okay, so what do we need to do then? We probably need to mask out just a little bit of that because these guys here, they've got windows, right? So we want to have a way for those windows to have some light. And this at the moment is oriented towards true north. So north is indeed in that direction. So we actually don't care too much about their light because their light comes from there. So this is their light. Yeah, we'll just leave it as this for now. I think that should be okay. Cool. So let's add another plane. Shift-A, Mesh, Plane. And we want to rotate it the same rotation angle as we have for our base footprint. So I'm going to click on the footprint, go into item and check. And we're using 15.5. Go back in here, click on this plane and change this to 15.5. So it's exactly the same. Scale it, slide it, go to top view maybe even. Just somewhere where I can put it. So that grows a little bit more. So something to around this size. Doesn't need to be exact. In fact, it's better to go a little bit below so the booleans work a little bit better. Sometimes there's issues if we have an edge that's exactly intersecting at the same position. So I'm just going to go -1. Go into edit mode, select everything, E to extrude, and let's type in 6.5 because we went down 1 and now we want to go back up 1. And next, let's grab this edge and we want to snap it to this corner, right? So that's exactly where it should be. And now let's push this back 3 meters. So now we should have this aligned to exactly 3 meters underneath. And so we're going to have a lot of booleans. Luckily, Blender has a fairly new feature that allows us to use collections for booleans. So we don't have to manually keep adding loads and loads of modifiers. So let's create a new collection over here. Select all the booleans, drag them in there, and call this boolean. Boolean, boolean, boolean. Okay. So now we need to go back to our mass, go in the modifier settings, and yeah, we can get rid of all these and just have one. Change the operand type from object to collection. And wait, let's see if is that right. So we have one. So we got this boolean, that boolean, this boolean, and that boolean. Yeah, that should work. Okay, so let's click back on the massing. Sometimes, we haven't selected the collection. So let's go to boolean. There you go. So now they're all working. So it's getting rid of all of those things. And this one here, we need to make sure that it's disabled so we don't render with it. And we want to make sure that it's wireframe. So we go to the object properties, display as wire. There you go. So now, any object that we add into boolean is going to be automatically subtracted. And we're going to do the exact same thing on the other side. So let's duplicate this object, Shift D, and then I'm going to press Y to lock it along the Y-axis. So we move it onto the other side here. We definitely want to create a very nice colonnade along the edge of the water. Great, so now that's aligned to the edge. So I'm going to move it -3 along the Y-axis. And you can see because it's on that corner, it automatically starts to divide itself. Now these buildings, I am not exactly sure that they should be coming all the way to this edge. So we can step them back by going in the original massing, select this edge, and let's move that. Well, actually, that's moving just the top. So this whole side, and let's do something like -3. Now we're starting to get some issues, some interesting issues, right? So these floors are not always working. Usually if we move them around a little, they should start to behave a little bit better. There you go. So next, this setback should be moved a bit more. So let's do -3 more. Okay, so how is it looking on the camera? Okay, so now that's stepped back. We have a lot more clearer view of the area that we want, which is over here. So that's the area that we care about. So it's very good to see that, right? So it invites more people to come in. At some point later, we can even start to play with maybe this angle is not completely aligned that we have here, but it could come to there and invite even more people from different angles. So if we come out of this view over here, and we just go around, imagine that you're walking down the street, right? Tuk, 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 walking, and you're like, whoa, that's really beautiful, and you want to go. So we want to give more people the access, and an easy way to do that is by adjusting this edge over here. Okay, so let's continue. So we talked about creating some kind of area, something over here, right? A much nicer plaza. We already have something in there, a massing, not a massing, but an object. So let's go in there and just modify that object. I'm going to make it simple for now. Let's scale this Z to 0, and I assume this is already rotated the right angle, 15.5. Great. And what happened? I didn't do this in wire display, so some of the angles, some of the faces have been flattened, some not. Notice I'm using local orientation. When an object is rotated in object space, it allows us to easily rotate only in that local rotation that we've got going on. Okay, great. So now let's think about a good size for a plaza. So let's start with 20 by 20. Wow, okay, so this is a pretty nice size already in there. So we can try to see if we can go a little bit more generous. So maybe 25. And I like to have things as square as possible. Whoa, this grew tall. Actually, it does need to be that tall, that's right, because we want to subtract the whole building. But what do I want to do? I want to create a loop cut in here and put our origin point to there. So Shift S, cursor to selected, go into object mode, and then set origin to 3D cursor. There you go. So that stays exactly at the top. So let's exit out of local view. Screencast keys have been gone. There they are. So 25 by 20, let's try even 30. We want to make this quite generous, yeah? So something like this. Maybe 25 over here, and we draw this backwards. Great. So because that's already in that Boolean collection, you see everything has already adjusted itself. Now, if we're going to have this waterfall, and this is the super exciting feature, right? Imagine you're like on the side of a building and you walk around and all of a sudden you see a massive waterfall. I don't know if it's going to be 16 floors high or maybe it's going to be a little bit less, but the idea is that it falls and, you know, it really captures your attention and you're like, wow, this is nice. That's the experience that we're going for here. But that waterfall, it will be a very structurally different, well, maybe not. I mean, should it be here by the building? Or should it be a bit more free-flowing by, you know, putting something just here? Like we can put some kind of bridge. And it's just water that comes down. It's probably going to be a fair bit of water, right? So, that might work. How tall should that be? That must be 2 meters. It's got to be a proper sky bridge, I think. That could be really interesting now that I'm thinking of it. So we can have like a proper sky bridge that you need to service, right? But not only service, but imagine just walking through it. And it's almost like in the forest. You can go on that sky bridge there and you can look down. So you can go in here. You're like, whoa, that's really neat. And you can hear it and all that. Not only is that nice, but it kind of keeps the waterfall experience centralized. Now, I don't think it's going to be that high though, because when water falls this high, everything around here is going to be wet. Like this plaza is going to be basically the wet plaza. So we need to keep people a little bit dry. So how do we do that? We just have to think about the bridge being somewhere lower. So how about, 10 floors up? So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. 10 is a nice number, isn't it? So we go from somewhere over here. That's still quite high, isn't it? But that might work a bit better. Everybody would definitely still notice it, right? So you won't be able to miss it. And yeah, that's looking exciting. Now from that space on, let's continue this wonderful Booleans work that we have. And by duplicating this Boolean over here, and we're going to start stepping back some of these buildings. Not that much, although that's pretty interesting too. But let's go now from the 10th floor. So we've got some kind of terrace that's happening from that edge over here. So let's go into editing this Boolean. And then, I don't know, maybe we do stay like that a little bit. And the plaza is very internally facing in here. Now at some point we have to think about the grid of these buildings to understand exactly where's the best position to put these setbacks, because presumably whenever we have a grid, well, let's do that now that we're thinking of it. Let's go to create a new node. I think we have one. So this one is a good start. So let's carry on working with it. Because here we have, and let's turn this off. Yeah, so we had that sketched idea for the previous. I'm going to erase stuff. I hope you're also realizing how useful the sketch tool is in Blender. It gets even more useful with grease pencil, like we can turn some of this into real geometry at some point. But we won't be doing that now. Okay, so I actually realized that at some point I also done an iteration that I completely forgot about of this building. And instead of treating these as 3 separate buildings, the way that it's going to work best, let's call this core and shell. These are our annotation layers. So we can have most of the lifts happening in here. So this is basically going to be the service area, and you know, you have some nice public facing amenities that are happening in this middle building here. So we're going to have lots and lots of lifts, probably like, you know, 8 lifts, 4 in one direction and 4 in the other. Might even need more. Like hospitals need so many lifts, so many lifts. And you know, we'll still have cores in here for emergency access. They can be somewhere along the edges, as long as our distances work. But just looking at them, the distances should work okay. Maybe that one there is what? Let's measure. 37. Yeah. So we might need to move that a little bit along this edge, that core. Just so, where am I? Notation, and then erase. Okay, so that's okay. That core is somewhere over here. But, so those cores are going to be stairs and maybe like an emergency lift or a service lift, because there's always a lot of servicing in hospitals as well. You need to put big supplies, so they have like these massive carts that need to go on these larger lifts, right? So it's ideal these days if we have separate lifts for all that information to happen. Okay, so beyond that, the idea then is to really connect these buildings. So everybody's using the same cores. So you come in here, you know, you enter probably, where do you enter? You might enter here or maybe there or maybe here. We have to figure out the best place to enter. It might be over here just because it's kind of close to the hospital, or maybe that ground floor, it gets stepped back even more to something like that. And that could be a nice point because you understand where the entrance is, and that's really important from the rest of the hospital. Even though, again, there's a brand new building that's, I don't know if they've started construction of it yet or not, over here. Let's see if I can dig it up so you have an idea of what that building looks like. So let's see if I search for St. Mary's Hospital. New building, hospital, new building, images. There it is. So that's the building that's going up. And that's the pub, that's the historically protected pub. And they've even shown a bridge to a potential new building exactly where our site is. So that's quite nice. So that's it over here. And I mean, everybody does the same thing because it works, right? So you have a podium level that's a little bit more public facing, a little bit more open, and then the high levels on top. But it's a pretty big building. So this is going to house quite a bit of hospital activities in there, which means that there will be both staff and, more importantly, patients that need to come down from here and go to our building. Now, we're going to add a bridge like they've shown here as well. But beyond that, what we might need to think about is also having some kind of understanding of a facing element from here. And we've actually already started doing that with this gap in here, right? Because we have that kind of understanding in there. So let's just say for now that we enter in here. It could be, you know, either from there or from there. We'll see. Maybe it's even from that side, and this is reception, where you can come from both that side and that side. Then from there, from the entrance, you were told which floor to go, which wing you need to go on. You go in the lifts. There has to be a very generous space between them. You take your lift up the building, up you go. And then from there, you go either to this wing or to that wing, or probably these are going to be offices in here because it's quite small for a proper wing, but you can have the consultant offices in there. Although they're a bit like suites, so you know you have your typically you've got your rooms. So in hospitals, the excuse me, they're almost like self-enclosed units, like office suites, right? So each suite has its own entrance, you know, usually a reception or something of that sort, and then you've got some rooms in there, and along those rooms you might have, you know, some storage, some facilities, and somewhere, depending on the kind of wing that you're in, the kind of suite, there might also be consultant offices, so the doctor's offices. So this might be like the patient rooms, and these might be the consultant offices and reception, nurse station. Yeah, quite a few things. Again, we won't focus too much on showing these at this moment because it can get very technical and it's an art in itself, which takes a lot of time. But the massing is what we love and what we're going to be dealing with here quite a bit. Sebo says, hi, thanks, great tip. Boolean with collection. Yeah, it's a really good one. It saves a lot because as functional as Blender's Booleans are, sometimes it can get too heavy and get in the way of the design process, right? If we're dealing with Booleans too much. Let's make this a little bit brighter. And that makes it so much nicer and easier to work with. Okay, so to continue. So our user journey. You come in here. Or am I before I start randomly moving things? You come in here, you go up the left, and you go to that wing or that wing. So what does that mean? That we need to have like these really prevalent bridges, strong bridges. They can exist everywhere. They could be fairly transparent as well. We need to have an adequate amount of length. So two people with wheelchairs and, you know, the person behind them can move in both directions, right? So that's the least amount of width that we need in there. And, you know, that's not too much when you think about it. You need like, you know, 1.2 and 1.2 meters, but ours should be, you know, at least 4.5 meters tall. However, we want to keep that distance to a minimum because if it's too big, then we're going to block too many views. Imagine having like a really, really chunky bridge here, right? Then we're really losing that connection that we're trying to create there. So we're going to try 4.5 meters and see how that works. So let's go and turn this layer off. We didn't talk about the core. That's okay. So we got to the bridge though. And that's important to show the bridge in there as well. How should we do this with the bridge? We can do it by... we can do a boolean in here. Yeah, maybe that's an interesting one. So we can add booleans to our boolean objects. And I think that's a fascinating way to work. So let's duplicate this. Shift D to duplicate. Keep it there. Rotate it along the Z 90 degrees. Whoa, that's pretty cool. Let's go into top view now, and we want to get this boolean out of the boolean collection and put it in our general massing collection. Where is it? Here. And I'm just going to put my cameras over here so it's a little bit easier to understand. Okay, so that boolean should not... Yep, it's not part of that collection, so it doesn't go there anymore. So what do we want to do? I'm going to isolate this so it's just a little bit easier for us to understand. Select all these bottom elements over here, X to delete, and we only want to delete the faces. So we keep these bottom bits together, F to create a face in there, and now let's position our cursor, our origin of this object, exactly where we have our cursor. So Shift S, cursor to select it, right click and set origin to 3D cursor. Now we know that this is bottom 1 and it's 5.5, which is the right height. So now we can change the width and it's all oriented exactly as our other object. So now what do we want to do here? What is the width? So we set 4.5 and this one doesn't matter because remember what we're going to do here is, and did we get that wrong? Did I get that wrong? Let's see, this has to be 4.5. Yes, and that can be white. Doesn't matter what it is. There you go. Okay. So that's the bit that we're going to, for the time being, just erase from here. But with the intent being that later we're going to modify it a little bit better. Okay. So now I want to parent this object to our main deletion element. So if we move this or rotate it, it's going to follow, which it doesn't right now. So we can click this item and then shift click and then control P to parent and set parent to object. So now if we move, you see that it's following. Next, let's click on this main Boolean item over here. And Booleans, by the way, they're at object level, so we will need to do the same and apply it on the other side. So with that object selected over here, we're going to go and go into modifiers, Boolean, difference, and select this box. And there you go. So what did we do here? So we've got our Boolean box from which we're subtracting this area. So if we just isolate this, that's what it looks like, right? So we have that cut out from there. And that's allowing us to create that bridge. And we can lift that bridge because I see it's not at the right level. I thought it is. That's odd. Oh, it is. Okay. It's just 5.5 might not be enough, which is interesting. It should definitely be another level up. Or we can say that our podium is actually 2 levels. Yeah. So it's a little bit more generous. So it's like a level and a mezzanine, which should be something like 8 meters. So let's first move all of our floors. The bottom is at 8 meters. And now we need to go to this Boolean item over here. Going to isolation. As you see, I mean, it's a little bit like Blender. If any of you have used Blender, not Blender, this is Blender. If any of you have used Revit, isolation mode is your best friend. I always go into it because it's so much easier to edit something in isolation mode than it is outside of it. And usually we have this text. I turned it off because I think I was taking some screenshots. So now that we have our screenshots back in there, we can see a little bit better. Okay, so now let's move this to 8 meters. So that should already align itself. We do have a little bit more work though, right? So we have to go in here and we can select both the setbacks. So this one and this one over here, and select the top faces. And I know they're at 5.5, so G, Z, 2.5 to make them 8. Now they have some discrepancy here. That might be, it's not in calculation. Sometimes it is, but sometimes Blender makes errors as well with the numbers because it's not double float. Usually there's no problems if you work quite close to the origin. Or sometimes, you know, it does happen that I might have snapped. Yeah, it looks like I might have snapped to something that is at the wrong level. So just like to make these quite nice and even. Okay, so now we have like an 8 meter setback. That's getting really sharp, so we will need to adjust that as well. And now we need to move this box. So the bottom is at 8 meters as well. So let's see what our view looks like now from the side. So let's go in here, camera view. Great, so we see it. And the idea is that all of this is very transparent. Yeah, so this is just glass, pure glass, so you can see beyond it as much as possible. We're gonna test that in a little bit to see how much we see from the floor plates and to see if there's a little bit of potential to try to make this a bit larger, because the larger floor plates would allow for a bit more access to go in there. And there are some regulations. I mean, we do have a fair bit of volume happening in this site, fair bit of area per each floor, so we might need a bit more. But that also depends on fire egress and fire regulations, and because we are definitely going to need to have a core in here with emergency stairs, probably 2 of them, that can shrink down the width of this kind of corridor. Now, let's go and open our sketch here that we had and see where it aligns, because, yeah, that's what I thought. We might need to move this a little bit over on this side, so it's better aligned with where the core ends up. It's not ideal where it ends up in the building, because we would lose a bit more area on the corridor. So we might want to shift it back a little bit. And let's make it a bit larger now. So 4.5, we'll try out 6. Yeah, I think 6 should be good. And now we need to do the same thing on the other side. So the easiest thing is to erase that. Select this, because we've already done all the changes. Even though that one was a copy, we still need to figure out how to align those items. Right, so how to align these. So Alt D, so Alt D duplicates linked. And now rotate 90. Doesn't matter which way. To put that building back in there. And I think that angle needs to be adjusted a little bit more. So R, Z. We don't want to end with a sharp corner. We want to minimize sharp corners as much as possible. Okay, so that's good. And it's always a good idea to check what the ground level is starting to look like. And again, I'm thinking of opening these up a little bit more so the ground feels even more transparent. I need a person in here. It's always useful to have a person because they really help with the scale. So I already have a couple of people in here. And then Alt D to duplicate. Escape to leave it in place. I've put already the cursor in there. Shift right click in case you don't know. You can use the cursor hotkey in there and then Shift S and selection of cursor. So now if I go back into ground view over here, we can start to see exactly where this person is. And you know, it's a pretty big space for that person. So that should work pretty well for us. So we have our ground, which is ground floor plus a mezzanine level. And that is not serviced from here. That's serviced from, you know, we probably have some escalators and local lifts. So that's the only tricky bit is, okay, so if you are a person with disabilities and you want to get into the mezzanine in this area, then how do you do that? How do you get up there? Do you take a lift? You know, you definitely don't go up in this part of the building. You go up one level and you go down, right? That's not very efficient. And that's where it gets a little bit tricky. So what's going on in that mezzanine essentially is the question, right? I don't know. Maybe it's retail, like some of the other guys have it. Or maybe it's, you know, public services that have like an escalator in there. I think even with an escalator, we would need a lift to get in there, but we will again provide some cores in there which are required for our lifts. Cool, so we're getting there. Now we can think more about setting back on these sides over here. And you know, again, I'm not very sure about the program and whether the program requires that. In this case, we're really thinking about the architectural massing along the waterfall and providing that really excellent and beautiful experience for all of those. Also about the height, 65.5. Can it be higher? Yeah, sure. Can it be lower? Definitely. However, the building that they're thinking about possibly happening here, and it's because of all the program that's required, might be, I don't know, but it might be very big, very, very big. Remember when I saw that, I was shocked at the height that it's proposed. So, you know, we are pretty chunky as well. It's not, you know, the smallest volume that we've got, but we are more or less matching our neighbors, and that's important. That's what people consider here. There's always going to be complainers, you know, for these kinds of things. I was reading for the planning application for the building that I showed you earlier, and because this building went back, you know, it's a new building as well. It's a residential building, and of course they were complaining about lighting rights and so on. It's part of the beauty of the democratic process, which is building in the UK. I love it because, you know, the more discussion you have with various stakeholders, yes, perhaps a little bit of the original design intent gets diluted, but at the same time, you are making sure that you're meeting everybody's requirements as much as you possibly can. You know, that's not always the case, you know, in all cases, but in many cases it is. And that's what I think is really important here. So once we have this, let's continue, and yeah, we can just duplicate these because they're in our boolean. So Shift D to duplicate that and start to set back a little bit. We're gonna have to get rid of some of these sharp corners here. These sharp corners, they do not work well for for buildings. We have the same problems over in that massing over there. So maybe at some point those need to come back. And now I'm going to do a sanity check just to see how long some of these edges are. What do we have here? So measure tool. There's a measure tool in Blender, by the way. I don't use it that much, but it's useful. And we can snap. So if I click and hold the snap and measure, so that's 15.3. Okay, that's doable. You know, you can have like 2 rooms in there to go back to a corner that serves the center. This one is a bit tight though. 8 meters. So you have 1 room in there. That can still work as long as we're not terribly tight. Like these corners, again, they don't work. We'll need to set them back a little bit. Probably they're going to go to something like that. Oops, I'm drawing on the wrong layer here. To here. That's probably what's going to happen. So here and here. So we have those angles. And we will do the same here. So, you know, that's going to get stepped back. And that corner is going to get stepped back. That's going to make it a little bit more useful for us in terms of the geometry. And it's also like all these corners, they always open up views a little bit more, right? Because if you think about the chunk of space of views that this is taken out, for example, from like a person being there and looking out in that direction, it's quite a bit, isn't it? So that helps a lot with that respect of, you know, like if you imagine, you know, this is being down here, then there's so much more views that are happening, more connectivity to the rest of the site. Very well. Let's carry on now with our setbacks of the massing. So 10 floors, so this is pretty good. It does get maybe a little bit hard to read at some point. So you know how we created that pointless loop cut in here? Sometimes those loop cuts do help, by the way. Like in booleans, to like if there's errors, having a little bit of subdivision in the geometry helps resolve a lot of those potential errors. But right now our shape is fairly straightforward, fairly simple, and it seems to work pretty well. So we've got this going on here, and yeah. And now I'm thinking, okay, this boolean, we can move it back. So, you know, in a way, this is a bit like SketchUp, but backwards and procedural, right? Because in SketchUp, we're not pushing and pulling our booleans, we're pushing and pulling our surface. But, you know, like, just to demonstrate, I have a friend from university he's really great architect and a really excellent SketchUp user, swears by it, of course, with Revit as well. But this is, maybe I'll even send him a screenshot of this, where, you know, you can rotate that and all these things adjust. You can't do that with SketchUp. Maybe some people can, but most cannot. Or if you know a way, let me know. I'm curious, actually. Always curious. Always curious about better ways to do things. Okay, so this is one setback. And in this kind of shape, we're really going to shape it up. You know, it's an extrusion, but then it just sets back, sets back, sets back. And, you know, we have like all these levels. In fact, at some point, I find it very useful to grab some kind of screenshot in here. Oh, no, I lost our bridge. There's our bridge. So let's take a screenshot. And yeah, I also like to work in isometric for some screenshots as well. It makes it a little bit easier. So one screenshot over here. I'm going to put that somewhere in there. We already have some kind of layer. I'm just going to hide that. And let's find another screenshot. So something like that, because that's very tall and that's very chunky. Okay. So let's drag this in here now. And we do what hopefully you understand is like at the concept level, perhaps the most important part of the project is not only doing, but loads and 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 loads of sketching, right? So let's see now. You guys see me okay? I need to focus my camera. It's getting tired. I don't know why it's getting tired. Just give me a second here. I need to put something in the middle of the screen and then it will be happy. There you go. Now it's happy. Okay. Find my right pen and start sketching. Okay, so what do we have going on here? So we have our waterfall. We have this kind of sketch that we already know. And, you know, maybe we start to shape this up even more, right? So it's never beautiful when you have a building that just goes up like this. So, okay, so that can step in. You know, we can step in on that side. Maybe we take it all the way, including that side over there. And from that point on, we can go up. But also we want to step back over here. Yeah, so that bit is going to step back as well. And these are going to be some really beautiful terraces. You know, this space here, so all of this, is probably going to be public using. So that's going to be a publicly accessible plaza. And that's quite important, right? So you have people that can really enjoy that. And I mean, you know, I'm sure you can imagine like being in a situation where you have something very wrong with you, or you know, a loved one is struggling in the hospital. And when you're in that kind of situation, anything that can help, anything that can improve your experience it adds a lot of value to the hospital experience. And you know, with us, we're super lucky here because we have this access to the water, and that access to that water can provide the kind of experience that could be very soothing and make everybody's work better. You know, the relatives work better, the staff as well, if they come here and have a break. And you know, just imagine just being next to a 10th floor waterfall. It sounds loud, right? Might need to be controlled. It might be a bit of a trickle at some point in order for it to work well. Right, so we've got the public facing areas, and yeah, so the other plazas that we're containing, some of those, we should have another really nice and large plaza, which is going to be only for staff. Sorry, my phone was ringing. I forgot to put it on silent. So, okay. Let's go back to our black color here and think about what else we can step back. So, we might have two layers here, 2 floors, and then we'll probably step it back again. I think it's very neat when we have buildings that really respect, and this is only massing at this point, right? So this is like the volume. This is the minimal amount of volume that we're going to consider. It's not going to be the actual building. The actual building facade could be following that, but it could also be something that's very different, right? So we'll find that out when we get to the next levels. But first we have to have like a really strong idea of what our massing looks like. Sorry, I just need to turn off my phone here. Put it on silent. There you go. Cool. So, if we carry on. So yeah, we have another step back in there, and then another step back, and then another step back. And that should end the building quite nicely. And we do that in the front here as well. Yeah, in fact, we do have a screenshot in the front, so we can start to mark this up also. So what do we say here? So you can imagine how that corner is going to get eaten up, basically, right? So we have something that works a little bit better architecturally. It makes a little bit more pragmatic sense than having this sharp corner. We can do that sharp corner. That's not a problem, but not absolutely necessary. And since we're in this mass shaping category of understanding how our massing work, so that's going to help us significantly with understanding that. Okay, so we have those corners cut out, and then we start to work backwards, or we pick a level, maybe this level over here, and we're going to step our building back. And then we're going to step it back again. I think 2 step backs, that should be enough in there. So, I'm not drawing this 100% correct. And the bridges, what's going to happen? So the area between the bridges, around the bridges, that's going to step back. So, it'll be something like this, and then like that. So that goes in there, and then we step back all these areas. So the top footprint would probably be something like that here. And then we've got all the other areas around onto it. And then here. And this bridge, as we mentioned, that's going to be super, super transparent. It's going to be a very clean, simple way to work with that. And, it's going to feel like the intent behind it is to feel like you can see through. Okay, so you can follow through that experience of the water from all the ground levels and then looking inside from both sides. And also the same, imagine being here, right? So this is the public facing plaza as well. Maybe that's what we do. Maybe the ground stays public and this is just staff. I think staff definitely need to have like a really beautiful area that is their own. And they can go in there, they can relax, and they feel like they can find their own little inner peace of 5 minutes in between crazy shifts and dying patients and whatnot. Not that all patients are dying, right? There's various situations, but this is one of the London emergency hospitals. So in case of a major disaster or an error in central London and there's one hospital that cannot cope, there's, I forget how many, like 4 or 5 hospitals that are designated like the emergency hospitals that, they have like pretty robust frameworks in place to deal with big disasters and handle a lot more, a fairly big volume of people that come in the emergency accident and emergency areas. Cool. So we're done with the sketching here. And now we can go back into our model. To start to step this back. So if we get the chunk of the massing right, I think that would be a good place to leave it for this session. And then we can focus on more. So with these booleans, by the way, we can continue to modify. Got screenshots in the wrong place again. Screencast keys. Let's put them here. So we can continue to modify, and I want to see our image. I think having access to those kinds of references I find very important. So I'm just going to try to minimize all the clutter that we have in the viewport by turning off some of the gizmos in there, so we see it a bit cleaner, a bit better. By the way, it's showing me that my internet is not working terribly well. So guys, if you let me know if there's some errors. And this time I am recording this session as well. So, if it's not working out completely, I have a local recorder copy that I can upload later. Right. So with booleans, we can create subcollections. So we can have, let's create a subcollection. And we can say it build large building. Large. So these are all the big ones, right? That give us the general shape of the massing. So, okay, so some of these are not in there, and that's because, yeah, these are the bridges, right? So we have to just be mindful of how things are organized. Let's just see here. Okay, so we're just dragging these now into this. And the beautiful thing about working with collections in booleans is that anything that's inside of another collection, so a sub collection, inside of a collection, it all works. So you don't need to worry about whether it might work or it might not work. Why am I doing this? So we can start to turn some things off. So we have an easier understanding of what goes where. Let's just call these Boolean from bridges. Lots of booleans. Lots and lots of booleans. So I'll put these in here so we can control the visibility pretty well. Yeah, so I can turn these off. You know, they're parented to these buildings, so if we move them, they're going to respond and move with them. So we don't need to worry about them too much. But we have them in there just in case, right? Okay. Now this one is a big boolean as well, so I'm going to put that in there, and we can start to hide that section. So now we have like a little bit of a better clarity of what's going on with our maskings, with our shape. I have some face area turned on here, so I'm going to turn that off because we don't need it at this point. And let's carry on. Just making these a little bit smaller so it's easier to understand, because we're going to be modifying a lot of them. So somewhere over here. And so what are we going to do now? So let's create another collection and call that maybe medium or small. I'm not sure at this point. And where are the 4 ones? So we've got 1, 2. We have the 2. Is it the bottom ones? Yeah. Okay. So these can go in large as well because they're shaping up. I mean, they're not large, but they're still shaping up like the general building. Just a way of organizing, I suppose. Okay. Right. And now all we need to do is drag these into our medium layer and start duplicating. And now I'm going to move this. How big did we say our levels are? So let's do this. By the way, this is not precisely aligned, so we can see if we can start to align things a little bit better by using snaps. So I'm going to select this, then G, then Z, and I'm going to hold Control. And might be a little bit tricky to snap. Maybe if I have wireframe turned on. It's getting a little bit hard to see in X-ray, isn't it? And with the X-ray, we can also change the opacity of things to make them more transparent or less transparent. But at some point, when you have too many layers, yeah, it becomes quite difficult to see. I can use these corners, though, here, hopefully, to snap. Maybe not. Yeah, that's not working too well. So what do we want to do here? I think we just need to find out the length. So a new feature that I found out recently is we can snap our cursor. So if I hold Control, I have the cursor selected here. And that cursor is Blender's snap system, but I just snapped to a different place. So now it's snapped. And in the view tools, so we have 3D cursor, and that tells us the Z height. So that's what I'm after here, 42.16. So now let's click back on this. Oops, I moved it, but that's okay. We know what it is. Wait a minute. Oh no. All right, so now we need to go to Item, Transform, and what was the number? 42.16. There you go. Now that's aligning exactly, and we can get in like a little bit of a struggle with that. So we can just tweak it a little bit down. So we are essentially exposing the floor plate, and that's how it would work in real life, right? So you have the floor plate that's going all the way up. And let's put this one here as well too. I'll just put it at 42. Okay. So that's working pretty well here. Look at that thin strip of buildings that we have. That's pretty interesting. So we'll start from 42 in here as well. And we're going to move 2 floors up. And let me just remember what we said. It was our floor height difference. So if we go in here, array 4.2 meters. So 8.4 meters is what we want to move. So let's click on this and go now. We can even go in here. Yeah, I want to show you that. So in here, I can type plus 8.4, right? And now we've got like this nice setback that's happening over here. And let's move that out a little bit. wow, it's pretty cool. I've thought about actually using it in this way, but usually the concepts that I do are, let's say, a little bit less grounded with Blender, right? So I'm sure you've seen them. Maybe you haven't. So you can go to uhstudio.com. Well, you've seen my videos, you know what I do, right? And then, you know, there are all kinds of projects, buildings that they're basically free flow. Okay, I have one that's about Queen's Park. Okay, I mean, yeah, not all of them, but some of them are like a lot more, let's say, free flowing, right? And this is great. This is concept architecture. It's you know, very high level design. You know, understanding how to do these kinds of masses and shapes, which have their own form. In fact, if you want to learn a little bit more about creating some of these shapes, you can go to Academy, so academy.uhstudio.com, and here I have some courses about creating some more conceptual sided shapes, and you can also find, you know, the courses that are done with other partners, other platform partners, and there's going to be a lot more courses, by the way, coming up. So check them out. But you know, the intent of this video series here is to really show you like the typical design process that we would face in an office setting, right? And how you would think about it. And yeah, thought it might be good to do this live. Okay, so we have this bit over there. Let's duplicate that. So we can step this building back here also. And you know, at some point, I don't know if it gets too heavy to keep duplicating things. So what I'm going to do is start to edit one specific mass. Can you snap to something that you're hidden from? Struggling. Let's snap to this corner over here. Okay. And now I'm going to extrude something and then snap from this face and then extrude. Let's move that way out back. So if we go to top view, we can select all of these vertices. Make sure I'm in X-ray mode because I did not select them all, and move that now to something like -3 to start to have a setback that's happening on all sides. Okay. I'm not sure we need it on this side. At some point, this building is going to go away, and whatever they built on there should be a bit better. Wow, we're really close to that side, to that edge. I don't know if there's, of course there's windows there, so we might need to set that back a bit. Where am I? Am I in street view here? Not quite. Oh. We moved a bit. There's the hospital. Yeah, of course we have windows. Why wouldn't we have windows? It's a building with patient rooms and things like that. And there are the windows. So we need to set that our space back a little bit from that corner. And that's okay. So our building is again over here on this side. So let's go now in here. And oh, this is great. Because how easy is it to move that side? We just go back into our uncut original massing. It's like a piece of cake, right? We're just cutting it into smaller and smaller pieces. And now let's go and drag this. What do we want to do it? Let's do something like 3 meters in the negative direction. And then everything else, boom, adjust itself. Wait a minute, that's the wrong side, but we do need to set back. Well, we did discuss that these guys don't have windows, so that might be okay. Nevertheless, it's always a good idea to set some space back. Now let's go to top view on this side over here and go to the massing, select this edge, and we want to move it. Wow, we're literally touching that building. Again, footprint, not sure. These footprints, they come from OSM. To check that out, go watch the previous video to give you an idea of how it works. But I'm going to select this edge now and maybe move it back 6 meters. There you go. So once we move these 6 meters, you know, the massings, they change a little bit, right? Like the proportions change, everything changes. So we can always go now to our large booleans here and shrink them down. Maybe, yeah, 18 meters is a lot. I thought we did 12. So let's go back to something like 12 meters. And why is that different? Ah, okay, because these are linked, but we're scaling in object space. And that's why we need to do it with both massings. And then, okay, so the proportion of the buildings is changing a little bit. So we might want to rotate this exit around, so it doesn't come all the way to the edge. And we can still, understand that something nice is happening, something interesting is happening on that corner. Okay, so double check our views just to make sure they're okay. I find that it's always important. Make sure we're at the right height. We are, we're missing some floor levels in there, but that's okay. We have it more or less working out. And the second view, that should be working pretty well. That's the important view. That's the one that gives us that connection to the rest of the site, basically. And this is what we want to make sure that we're handling pretty well. Okay, so my connection is starting to drop a little bit, I'm noticing. It's getting a little bit slower. Please, guys, let me know if you might have some issues on there. Let's carry on shaping. So I'm going to speed it up now a little bit. So I've been talking a lot and I'll be doing a lot more. So, and I won't be explaining everything because the rest of the video hopefully explains that pretty well. So X-ray, and let's move this -3. Oops, the other way, 3. Okay, that's working pretty well. I'm noticing our views, they can come in and out, so we can go to the view, and the end is at 1000. We can make that 500, and that's automatically going to make things, should make things a little bit smoother to see. Okay, we need to do the same here. I'm just going to move this -3. Okay, so we're stepping back those corners over here. And what happens? So we need to move our bridge. Let's make this a little bit more bridge-like. By selecting now these edges here. First off, we'll give it a little bit of thickness, and that's going to need a little bit more thickness than usual because it's going to have very hefty structure in there to span that, and not only to span it, right, but also to carry water and carry lots of water potentially. So let's extrude that at least 1 meter, right? So it's going to be quite chunky. So then let's extrude the sides, E, Z, 1.1 meters. Okay, so now we have a little something that's a little bit more reminiscent of a sky bridge. And now the alignment, by the way, Blender 4.0, it's going to have transforms with a base point, which is, CAD-like transforms, which is something that we have been terribly missing with in Blender. There's the CAD transform tool, which is a free add-on. It works well sometimes, but not all times. So I actually reluctantly use it, funny enough. You would think it's the kind of thing that would be very useful to use a lot, but yeah, not really using it that much. Okay, so, that is probably going to fall from somewhere from underneath. Yeah, great. We need this to land on water, right? So we are probably going to have to cut back somehow this plaza area here a bit to make sure that that works the way we intend it to work. Cool, let's carry on editing, modifying. Duplicate this boolean. Look at that. How cool is that? We just put a hole in our building. Oh, this excites me so much. Not that I want to have a hole in my building like that, but just the fact that, it's so easy to create these massings. So yeah, you might have told from the videos that I've done so far that, that Blender is only useful for very imprecise things, right? Or for architectural visualization. But here it is. We're doing like a proper architectural project. Who knows? Maybe we'll get a bit more organic a little bit later down the stages once we start looking at various facade options. for now, let's get the massing right. And as you may know, that's the step of any building. And we have, usually though, it's two-pronged, right? Here it's only single-pronged. What do I mean by that? So typically we have the programmatic requirements that are driving the size of the building. But the buildings these days, it's very important for them to always have some kind of expression. And that expression helps us, sell the concept, sell the idea a lot more. There's a story behind it. Every building is its own story. Why? Let's snap. Oh, these booleans, they're not very happy with the snap. So what can we do here to align this correctly? This is an excellent problem to have, because we need that level of precision, don't we? So let's see, I'm moving along the Y local, and it just doesn't want to snap to the right place. Okay, you know what? I'm gonna have to eye it for now, because this is, let's stay there. Okay, and now we move it 3 meters inwards. Great. Wow, that face is very big, right? And these are very narrow. So we have to think about those proportions and those lengths. It might be that we need to rotate this item here a little bit more. Maybe not that much. Something like that. Okay. That's already looking a little bit better. And yeah, when we reduce our corners, that's going to help significantly as well. Although, like with the setbacks, the reduction of those corners is going to get a little trickier. Yeah. Not undoable, just a little trickier. Right, so that's setback number 1. Oh, and we need a setback. Let's make sure that this is well cut. There you go. We need a setback from this building here, presumably at some point also. And what do you guys think? I mean, should we, at some point, maybe this is an open design session. You could be my critics. We could have something to break down the scale of this large facade. That's not only the actual facade, but that can be an actual design element, right? So we've got something in here that's helping with breaking it down. And that, maybe this is the start here. We have like a simple volume in the middle, and that volume breaks down the size of this. So I always find it useful to look at ground level. And yes, when we render, all those wireframe boxes stop being a wireframe. So we need to hide all of our booleans to understand the concept a little bit better. Yep, that's working okay. I think that might work as a starting point, right? Yeah. Yeah, these neighbors are really not going to be happy by having such a large mass. So we have to work a little bit more, a little bit harder here on this edge to introduce a bit more light and a little bit more setback. So let's carry on with that. So how do we do that? So first off, we can move this extra 3 meters in. -3. And we have to make sure, that these sizes also, they make sense, right? So that should be at least the length of a room. So if we measure it, let's try that again. So that's about 7 meters. So that's as narrow as we want to make it. In fact, that might be too narrow. We might want to decrease that a little bit. I never got how I erase these dimensions. Maybe that's why I don't use them much, because I really don't know how to get rid of them. Does anybody know? Like, do I need to just click on them or something? Or, trying with control. Okay, we can move things. Snap. Adding points. Yeah, I don't know how to. Does anybody know? Let me know. Okay. So now that we have that kind of set back in there, at some point it starts to become much easier to work with like existing elements, right? So duplicating this, and we can even extrude within it. Now, Blender might complain, but let's just see. And we know 4.2, so what do we want to go? 12.6. We have like a step back there. Okay, so far so good. So it's working well. So what am I doing here that's a little bit different? So I have, and why are they connected? I did something wrong, so let's undo. I didn't duplicate that face, that's why. So Shift D to duplicate that, and now extrude. And usually at this point it might start to complain a little bit. So let's try 12.6 in the negative direction and drag this out like that. And now we have some kind of funny floor in there. And let's go in there. Hey Alex, nice to see you on here. Thanks for joining. It's been a while. And I've created some duplicates. So I must have tried to extrude and then click undo. So let's select this, move it down. And, oh, okay, it's not a duplicate. It's just, well, just for good purposes. Let's try to see if we get rid of it. Okay, I didn't. Good. That's a rookie mistake. I don't want to make that. I want to appear like a professional. Okay. Let's carry on here. So yeah, we're starting to get a few errors here, right? So like there's some area in there that's being extruded, and because of the way that those things are aligned, our booleans, you know, they start to fail somehow. Okay, so we have to somehow understand how to make that so it doesn't fail as much. The easiest try to do it is go back in here and try the fast, and totally fails. So that's not going to work. So then we will do what we should be doing. So select this box, separate it. And now it's working perfectly when it's its own object. Hi Umberto Uno. Yeah, sure. I'm not sure exactly which question I'm answering, but happy I did. If you have any more questions, yeah, always let me know. Okay, so just carry on with the boxes. Rotate 90 degrees. Yeah, so this stuff is definitely not as terribly exciting as, you know, doing like really amazing. Because in this time, we could have done some really cool shapes, right? Like amazing shapes, you know that. But those shapes are great on its own, and it's good to know how to do them. But we also have to know how to apply some of that knowledge to some real world design. So that's where this comes. And I have to make it a little bit more interesting, right? Because we're just moving boxes around right now for designing it. But that's essentially it. You know, this is the core of architecture. It's moving boxes around. As much as I don't want to say that, but it's moving boxes around with a very strong purpose. And the purpose is to create better experiences for people. So now that we have that kind of, excuse me, massing on there, it's definitely worth to think about, you know, maybe we don't even create a new box, but it's this box over here. And we start to shape that back. Push and pull. That's the name of the game. Push and pull. So this is getting very interesting in here. In the end panel, Wallason Madero says, I believe that there is a button on the end panel under measurements section, a button called clear measurements. Thank you for that. Let's check it out. So in the tools, if I click measurements, active tool, don't think, yeah, I don't see anything here in the active tool. Maybe it's only in this top view that I hide. So show tool settings, also not here. Never mind. It's okay. I'm sure it's a very simple and straightforward answer that shouldn't require so much thought. Cool. So, okay. So we have one challenge here, one design challenge now, right? So we had to move, because of this setback over here, we have had to move our bridge down. That gets a little bit tricky, right? Because that waterfall now is sitting in the middle of, it's further away from the water, so we need to puncture our plaza with more. So we need to take away from it around the water, right? Because the water has to land in water. Although, I don't know if this water would land in here. Let's think about that. This would probably be its own kind of water, wouldn't it? Yeah, so it can get recycled. Well, I don't know if it can get recycled. But what I'm saying is this water can get quite dirty. And this is definitely going to be splashing people. And if it is splashing people, we don't want it to get splashed with like really dirty water, but some kind of cleaner water. So this has to be filtered, and maybe there's a pump that can recycle it. Because if it's landing in there, that water is not getting recycled. If it's landing in here, yeah, sure, it's not the cleanest and we're losing things, but at least that water is getting recycled. Yeah, okay, that makes sense. So it is going to be different, in which case this setback is starting to make sense. We could even try to do it even a little more. Not too much though, because again, it's like and we have to see, we might need to lower down an extra level or two. I'm not a waterfalls expert. Artificial waterfalls. I'm sure there are a few. I've seen a couple of buildings. I put out some references years ago. I'm embarrassed to say how long I've been thinking about this project, by the way. I'm just really grateful to have a chance to actually do something about it. Than just sitting in there in my head thinking about someday that I'm going to approach it. So yeah, I'm not a waterfall expert, but how tall is this now? Where is this bridge? Height, 42 meters. 42 meters is still pretty tall. Now that I'm thinking of it, where have I been to a 42-meter waterfall? Yeah, quite a few floors. So we might need to lower it down. So I'm going to have to think about it, but you get the gist of how this massing is working. I might do just a little bit of tweaks offline next time, okay? So this is more or less the massing. We need to cut back some additional sections in there. And the intent is that, the massing, even as we have it here, is more or less done. The general massing of it, yeah? And then we have to go back with the next session and think about, okay, what is a terrace? Think a bit more about the public space that we've got here, and think a little bit more about, those bridges and how they connect to it. So that's going to be for the next session. Again, this building, my voice is starting to crack from talking so much. So this building is on Patreon. So if you go to patreon.com/UKHstudio, I'll just show you a sneak peek so you can check out some of the parts here. So that's just posting this so people can watch it live. But that's the kind of write-ups that I do in here. So you get a little bit more about the process in there and the files. I think that's important. So if you guys like the work that I'm doing, you want to support it, then yeah, Patreon would be a pretty good decision. So cool. So with that, we're going to end this session, and I'll see you again next time. Now I'm still thinking whether to have 2 sessions or 1 session. I really want to have 2 sessions. Tried Sunday last time. I think like my network or the network around the area gets quite busy. Maybe I'll try a different time on Sundays or the weekend. Maybe you guys can let me know also what might work for you if you want to follow through. And see you next time.